how do you lubricate a Savage bolt? We're going to take one completely apart and I will show you how to lubricate and clean every single last part of it. Now, absolutely first and foremost, do not use Remington oil. It's like spraying salt on your gun. I can't believe they sell that stuff. Anyways, these are the 3 different products that I like to use for various different things. Now, this is Aeroshell 64. This is a grease that is designed and used in observatories at 10,000 plus feet. So it is really stable across all different temperatures. And that's why I like using this. This is what you would use for all parts that rub against each other. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be using one of these tubes to apply this stuff. So that's Aeroshell 64. Now, the other 2 products that I use are for various different things. Now, this is CLP by Break Free. This is pretty common. You can find this at Walmart. And this stuff is very thin, okay, but it's an excellent rust preventer. And that's what this is used for, is rust prevention. The same thing with CorrosionX. CorrosionX is a terrible name. I don't know why you would put the word corrosion in the name of your product if it's designed to protect your product from corrosion, but you know, whatever. I guess the X part means that it inverts the name's meaning, whatever. So yeah, CorrosionX. Now this stuff is very thick. It's very, very sticky. It's green, smells great. Now CLP, what I tend to use CorrosionX for is the surfaces of large objects, whereas I use CLP on very small things where there's a lot of nooks and crannies to get into, because the CLP will actually foam on contact initially, which means it will reach into all those nooks and crannies and cracks and crevices, and it will put a layer of rust preventative everywhere. Now, to do all the work, you don't really need a lot of tools. Really, this guy's essential. A lot of screwdriver, a 1/16 inch punch, which I have shortened a little bit, and I have also polished the neck of this guy quite a bit to reduce his diameter slightly. Typically a 1/16 inch punch will just barely not fit, so what I do is I chuck it up into a drill and I just sand it down until it does fit in the hole. And then of course there's a 1/4 inch Allen key hammer, and this guy's kind of optional. It's just to keep your parts organized down here. Alright, first things first, let's remove it from the gun. What we're going to work on today is a short action with a multi-piece firing pin. There are 2 different styles of firing pins. And to take it apart. Now, sometimes these are hard to do. You gotta like step on them to get them apart. I just finger tighten them in. I don't put them back in very hard at all. They don't really come loose on you with use. So there's that guy. Now this one has a bolt lift kit in it, which I make and sell. Gives you about a 20% reduction in bolt lift. But here we go. Here's the firing pin. This is what I call the cocking sear. This is the cocking sleeve. And then we'll pull this guy apart. This is the rear gas baffle. And then we have the bolt head up here, which you take this button and push that retaining pin through. And then off comes the actual head itself, okay? Now, these parts often have a lot of gunk and debris in them, especially if you maybe had a primer or 2 blow. A lot of good stuff can get into these spring parts. So we are going to take these apart. Now to do that, for the ejector claw, it's pretty simple. I put it face down and just take the slotted screwdriver here and you just push in the bolt face. Just like that. And there is a ball bearing in there that will come out, and then there's also a spring. So we'll pull that spring out for you right there. So what I do with these typically is take some air pressure to it and blast away any of the gunk. This one's clean though already. Now the last thing we're going to take apart is the ejector plunger, which for that there's a counter hole on the opposite side we're going to push out. And get it started, and then I put it over this hole right here, and I also put my finger over the ejector plunger so that it doesn't shoot out on me. This pin is actually made of aluminum. I'll drop that in there. Once you pull that punch out, that's when the ejector plunger is going to actually pop out. And there is your ejector plunger and also the spring. Sometimes these things have a stem on them, sometimes they do not. And so all of these parts we would of course clean, get any disgusting filth off of them. And then I like to use CLP on this. Pretty good way to fill it is just let it fill all the holes and then wipe it away. And then I got some on my fingers here. I'm basically just going to coat every single surface of this bolt head with this. Same thing with the bolt body. Now that I've got it on my fingers, you're just going to put a very, very thin coating of CLP everywhere. And you could also put some on a rag and then shove it through, kind of clean it out. This one is actually a little bit dirty, so we will do that. That looks better. And then I'll put a little bit inside. Now I'll take a clean one and kind of run it through. So there you go, there's the bolt body. Inside and outside, a very thin coating of CLP. So those two components are done, and we could actually start putting this guy back together. There'll be plenty of CLP down inside of these holes. Now that ball bearing, that can be a little tricky. It may be that you want to skip the ejector claw altogether. What I do is use this finger to push while I compress the ball bearing with the 16-inch punch, which, as you can see, it is a little bit tricky. I've done this many, many times though, just like that. I've done this thousands of times, really. Same thing with this guy. I've still got some CLP in my fingers, just kind of wiping it everywhere. And of course there's a bunch down in the hole already too. Now this groove, you're going to want to line it up with the hole. Now this aluminum pin should actually start pretty easy by hand. Sometimes they don't. This one's going to be a little stubborn. You can see I'm actually compressing the ejector plunger with my finger. And take the hammer, just kind of tap it in. And it is aluminum, so it'll go in pretty easy. So there's that. Your bolt head is lubricated and reassembled. Very easy. So next part, the firing pin. So this part gets different types of lubricant on different places. The rear of this, now because I've already timed this, I'm actually going to measure what my distance is. I timed and tuned this guy, so I don't want to mess it up. You screw off the rear retaining nut and hold on to this washer right here, this crown washer I call it, because sometimes when these things go off, this can go flying on you. So there's your spring and all this. Now you can take this apart further too. I've already lubricated every single one of these parts, but basically a little bit on your finger like this and just kind of get it everywhere. On the firing pin. The firing pin, we will actually just kind of wipe off lightly. And the reason for that is because this goes through a hole and we don't want anything to stick to it and ever possibly prevent it from actually going through the head, because then you could get like a light strike essentially. Now, Next part, this is the interesting part, and this is one of the faults to the design of this. So this washer here actually slides along this shaft, and it can sometimes catch on these threads and any burrs and so forth on this. You can polish these down if you want to. I haven't really seen it make too much of a difference. But essentially, because this is a friction surface, we are going to use Aeroshell 64. And what I do is I put a bunch on the flats of both sides, okay? And then we're going to put our spring back on. Actually put the firing pin into the head itself. Hold down on it with the spring. Drop that retaining washer on there. And then start screwing it back on, okay? And then we are going to screw it back on until it is as far back on as it was before. Which, look at that, one try. I've done this so many times. So, there's your firing pin. Your firing pin's all done. Now, if you don't want to take this apart, what you can also do is just squeeze a whole bunch on this rear section and then just kind of press it in with your fingers, okay? That's another way to do it. All right, let's start actually with all of these parts here. I've still got some CLP on my fingers. I'm going to get it on every single last piece. Often these springs get some gunk built. Bring it back out. And this area should be pretty much pulverized by the Aeroshell 64. We could put a tad bit more in there if you want to. Just don't go too overboard. Like I said, this stuff is extremely temperature stable. So even in minus 20, stuff's good. And not many people hunt in minus 20. And even below minus 20, it's still going to function quite well. So there you go. And I've still got some CLP, so I'm going to kind of, on my fingers, I'm going to rub it all over the bolt handle. And then if you don't want grease, just wipe off the knob lastly of all. And there you go. And that is how you lubricate completely a Savage bolt.